Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Franchise Hockey Manager 9 playthrough of the Chicago Blackhawks. We are in the 2030 offseason. Blackhawks had a great regular season last year, winning the President's Trophy for a second consecutive year. And then we were unceremoniously bounced in the first round of the playoffs by the Arizona Coyotes. So a definitely disappointing season from the perspective of ultimately winning a title, which is our goal every year. Still think that this team is in win now mode. And see, we've made a few offers to some of the lesser players in our organization to try to bring some of them back. And for players like Boyce Forlin, we've made them auto-qualify offers. So if they do get an offer in the open market, we'll have a chance to match it. We tried to get them both on two-way contracts. They both have minimal NHL experience, but neither wants to do a two-way contract at this point in their careers. They're both 24 years old, so I guess I get that. But I don't want to make as much of a commitment to either of them. And as we get ready for the new league year on July 1st, it's time for us to finally make a decision on the four players on our team on the NHL roster that are free agents that haven't been re-signed at this point. Kevin Korchinski, the right defenseman, is looking for almost $6 million a year. Quite honestly, at this point, he's our sixth or seventh defenseman. We do potentially need a right defenseman in free agency, but we're going to let Korchinski hit the open market. Similarly, Mathias Dubé, left wing, is kind of a need of ours, but he's looking for over $4 million a year, and again was one of the last players in our rotation this year. Just don't think that he's got as much upside as some other players on our team, so we're going to let him hit free agency as well. Although in the case of Dubé, we've got the auto-qualify on him, so we will get a look if he gets an offer from somebody else. Most difficult decision is our captain, Mitch Marner. 33-year-old coming off a really good year, 75 points in 75 games. And he has been a big-time producer for us ever since we brought him over. You can see he's probably averaged 25 or so goals a year over the 5 years with us. Scored close to a point a game. But he's going to be 33 years old, as I mentioned. And he's also looking for about $9 million a year in 4 years. And at his age, I think that's just too much. We can move Shields onto the first line and then move up Bocage, Laferriere, and Dzeko. We've still got Frank Nazar in the organization, although we might trade him away. We're certainly going to take a hit by moving on from Marner, but I think it's the right thing to do. And that brings us to 27-year-old center Cole Sillinger. And at center right now, it still remains a position of a lot of strength for us. We've got Quentin Byfield, Dylan Larkin, Nathan Villeneuve, and the 21-year-old Thomas Vesely. So from that perspective, there's an argument to let Sillinger, who's looking for about $6.5 million a year to go. But I think we can move him to left wing. You see, he's pretty competent at playing that position. And I feel that left wing right now is one of the less deep positions on our team. Top end with Kent Johnson, we've got a lot of quality there. But after that, it's Paul Cotter, who's getting older. It's Victor Eklund, who's coming off of a serious injury. And then it's Jet Luchanko, who we picked up on the waiver wire. And then Dubé, who we're going to get rid of. So what I'm thinking about doing now is making an offer to bring back Sillinger and potentially pivot him to becoming a left winger for us. I do like the fact that he brings a little bit to the table with everything. He's a solid offensive player, pretty solid physically, but he can also play a little bit of defense. Definitely a two-way forward, and he's pretty sound mentally also. So I think that he could slot in as a pretty good second or third left winger for us, certainly behind Johnson and likely in the mix with Cotter and Eklund for the second and third line. Give us a little more continuity since he's been with us for a few years at this point. And then the other part of our off-season plans is, I think, although I mentioned him in the mix for right wing, I think we trade away Frank Nazar and see what we can get for him. He's never developed into the player we thought he could be, and he's making a little bit over $2 million a year for the next couple seasons after this year. He's going to be a borderline roster player for us, and if we sign Sillinger for a little less than what he's looking for and trade away Nazar's contract, I think that gives us the opportunity to be in play for any defensemen who are out there on the free agent market to join our team. It's possible we bring Korchinski back after letting him hit the open market, but I hope we can potentially find a better alternative. But money is going to be very tight, and I think getting Nazar's contract off the books will help us be a bigger player in free agency. So the first thing we're going to do is shop Mr. Nazar. Ooh, doesn't look like there's a lot of demand for him. No offers. So that could be tricky. Does fit with my theory that perhaps he's overpaid in his current contract. So we'll also, at the very least, put him on the trade block. Hopefully there's a way for us to get rid of him relatively early in the offseason. Other than that, of the 4 free agents, Sillinger's the one that we're going to make an offer to. And see the $6.5+ million he's looking for 3 years. We'll try to bring him back for somewhat less than that. Start out at $5.95 million a year for 3 years and see what he thinks. He's come down a little. 6.15. Come on, Cole. I think we'll be able to get him at 6.25. All right, $6.25 million for 3 years for Cole Sillinger. And again, with the potential trade of Frank Nazar, hopefully at some point in the next month, month and a half, that should free up enough money where if we want to add a top line defenseman, I don't think we're going to be able to afford a Quinn Hughes or a Sam Rinzel type, but a solid NHL defenseman who can get in the mix, preferably someone who's a little more experienced at right wing, may give us an opportunity to upgrade a little bit from Korchinski this offseason. And we did get Sillinger signed, so that's good news. Just to make sure we keep track of what we want to do with him, we're going to set his position now to left wing. Feel like we've got tons of depth at center. And now with Cotter, Johnson, Sillinger, and Eklund, feel like we're pretty solid at left wing as well. Luchanko is probably a borderline roster player for us, particularly if we get rid of Nazar, who can play on both the left and the right side, so a decently versatile player to have. And not surprisingly, as we close in on the end of the financial year for the NHL, Mitch Marner expected to be one of the top free agents available. I just think that at his age, despite his productivity, it's probably the right decision not to get wrapped up with him for around $9 million a year for around 4 years. Feel better bringing Sillinger, who's 6 years younger, back. We'll see what happens. I'm sure he'll have a good year for the next season or two, but I'm guessing by the end of that contract, it'll be a pretty difficult contract if he does get the 4 years that he's looking for. And as I mentioned, with the position we are in as far as the salary cap, I feel better bringing back Sillinger and potentially adding a pretty good defenseman rather than just bringing back Marner and then not really being able to spend any money anywhere else because we'd be so close to the cap. And as we get close to July 1st, we've taken a look at all of our unsigned players. Basically have a lot of guys up who are facing the deadline June 30th, but a lot of late round picks over the past several years. Nobody, especially, they're also guys who are also in their early 20s at this point. The only one we're making an offer to is the goalie Oskari Servita. Think that he might have potential to be maybe a backup goalie for us down the line, so we're going to try to bring him into the organization. Otherwise, not a lot to do. Good news is that we do have multiple first-round picks this year from that trade we made with Boston when we sent them Matty Beniers, so that should be positive for us, give us some opportunity to increase the talent in the organization in a few weeks in the draft. I guess about a week and a half in the 2030 NHL draft. Move on to the awards ceremony. Not expecting a ton of honors for the Blackhawks since we don't really have much in the way of nominees. Doesn't look like there's really much of anything for the Blackhawks, which is not a surprise. You would think that coming off of a President's Trophy winning season, we might have a few award winners, but the Blackhawks have tended to not get a lot of respect in the annual awards or even just in the all-star voting over the course of this playthrough, which has been a little surprising. And as I mentioned that, nobody makes the all-star teams from the Blackhawks this year, and did have Xavier Veilleux, the young defenseman, make the all-rookie team. So nice to see a little bit of respect for Veilleux after a nice rookie year, 32 points, including 9 goals in 77 games, plus 32 on the season. And by the end of the year, he was a first or second line defenseman for us more often than not. And we did get Sarivirta signed, so that is positive, a little more goalie depth in our organization. Move on to the final day of the league year and see our evaluation. Obviously had a real good regular season, reached the playoffs, winning a season, winning percentage over 600, and we finished first, so the season score was a 26. Obviously would have loved to have been more effective in the playoffs. Does give us 5 points. As we've talked about in the past, I tend to mostly play as GM, but I am also head coach right now. So I think it's important that we put some points into hopefully helping us on the ice. Maybe that's been the missing link since I've been so focused on being a GM that my ineffectiveness as a head coach is costing us when we get into the playoffs. I don't know whether that's the case or not. But actually, I'll get everything up to 11, or at least the 3 things that I think are most important: tactics, in-game tactics, and player motivation. We'll put all 5 of our points into those categories: 2 in tactics, 2 in in-game tactics, and 1 in player motivation, which at least gets us, slightly above average in those 3 categories as far as head coaching. And then hopefully we can have a better year next year and get a few more points that we can spread around all of our skills. And as we move into the new financial year for the Blackhawks, just a couple things to highlight. Development report, not surprising. Dylan Larkin and the now free agent Mitch Marner continue to get less effective given their age. Owner gave us his confidence update. Very disappointed that we didn't win a championship. Expects us to contend this year. Wants us to find a good veteran in the offseason. Feels that we can go ahead and do it. fans are pleased with us, and he's agreed with the approach that we've taken to building the team. Also got a new broadcast contract at about $44 million a year for the next 5 years, so the Blackhawks remain relatively popular. We did have a scout retire, but it's time to work on our annual budget, and I don't think there's necessarily a ton that we're going to change. We've got a new stadium from last year, the Old School Sports Arena, excellent quality, going to go with normal maintenance. And I think we are going to raise prices again. We sold out every game last year. Going to raise player development. I think a normal budget is fine. We'll go with a very heavy marketing spend, given that we're going to be raising ticket prices. And then as far as our monthly expenses, continue to focus on scouting and team morale. And with no games, we don't need to really be investing at all in game promotions and arena operations right now. And oddly, as we look at the free agent defenseman, Korchinski was looking for around $6 million a year when he was on our team. Now that he's on the open market, he's only looking for about $5 million a year. But so is Simon Nemec, who is the same age. Going to just compare those two players. He's also looking for, as I mentioned, about the same money as Korchinski. They're both relatively versatile in that they can both play left and right pretty effectively. Taking a look at their offensive ratings, pretty close, but on balance, I prefer Nemec. On the defensive side, they're really almost identical, but overall, I'd say Korchinski is a little better. Physical skills, again, very similar, maybe a small advantage to Nemec. And mental ratings, again, really very similar. Probably a small advantage to Korchinski. So I don't think there's a strong reason to lean one direction or another. Our scouts do think Nemec is a little bit better in terms of his ability. Pretty good scouting report. He's comfortable in a new environment, stays out of trouble, doesn't let himself get complacent. Think he could be pretty close to value in terms of value. Plays the same way that Sam Rinzel does. Pretty decent two-way player. So I think that's who we're going to initially pursue at least. Looking for $5.04 million over 3 years. We'll offer him 4 3/4 over 4 years. See what he thinks of that. And he's willing to think about it. So we will submit that offer to Simon Nemec. He may become the newest defenseman for the Blackhawks. You can see we're at a little over $78 million right now with 23 players on the roster. So definitely if we get him for $4.75 million, I think with one of these contracts, most likely Guillaume Filion, coming off, will probably be just about right under the salary cap. With the extension that we signed to Sillinger, as well as potentially bringing on Nemec. And Simon Nemec does say that he likes our offer. We also got a trade proposal from the Lightning. They are looking at Nazar, so it's good that we put him on the trade block. They'll offer us 21-year-old defenseman Jonathan Wallen. Certainly a player who our scouts think have some potential with that 4-star potential. 21 years old, he's not all that extensively developed, unfortunately. But given that we basically just want to get Nazar off of our books, it may not be the worst thing in the world to do to bring on a talented young defenseman. Again, you look at his potential, it seems great, but you look at what his ratings actually are right now for a 21-year-old, and it's certainly not incredibly impressive. and his temperament and aggression indicate that he may have a bit of a short fuse. Ooh, he's also fragile everywhere. I'd say it's pretty unlikely that he's going to realize his potential. We've got 2 weeks to think about it, but not something I'm going to jump at right away in case we do get other offers on Mr. Nazar. And those of you who have watched me over the years know that I like to just collect talent. And even though we don't necessarily have a huge need or have the money to make it happen, Isaac Rosen scored 43 goals for the Canadiens last year as a free agent. And the Swedish player, sportsmanlike, stays out of trouble. He's fluent in English. He speaks good French at this point. Dynamic offensive player. Doesn't bring a ton defensively, but he can play both right and left wing pretty proficiently. And the number he's looking for at less than $5 million a year is pretty tempting to me for a 27-year-old. So I know we can't possibly fit him in right now. Even if we get rid of Nazar, I don't think we can fit him without making other moves. But I think he is a good enough offensive player that will try to make it work. We'll come in really light just to try to make the financial situation for us as easy as possible. I don't know that he's going to go for it, but we're going to offer him $4.55 million a year over 4 years. And he's willing to at least think about it. Again, with the offer that we've already got to Nemec and then bringing him on board, even if we were to move on from Frank Nazar, that's not going to, I don't think, clear enough money for us to get under the cap. But there's definitely other options. We could definitely move on from Jet Luchanko, and if we move on from both him and Nazar, that might just about get us there. I could do all this math and know to a penny, but I like to live dangerously. And Rosen says that he likes our offer. Obviously, we're still waiting to hear back from Nemec. But if we have to make some other moves to kind of third and fourth line guys to make room for Isaac Rosen, I think it's the right move for us to bring on a 27-year-old who's a pretty dynamic offensive player. And I think I misspoke earlier. It looks like we only have one first rounder this year. I obviously could have looked at that and figured it out for myself beforehand. Okay, we've got a second rounder from the Bruins this year. Oh, it wasn't the Bruins we got the first rounder for. It was the Penguins. Okay, so we got a second rounder from the Bruins from a previous trade this year. And we've got 2 first rounders next year, our own and the Penguins. And then in 2032, we also have 2 first rounders, our own and the Penguins. So I had thought we traded Matty Beniers to the wrong team. We traded him to the Penguins, not to the Bruins. So with the fact we're going to be waiting until the late 20s for our first pick in the draft, and then we've got our own second rounder and Boston's second rounder, probably not going to get any top flight prospects, but still interested in seeing what we can come up with in terms of hopefully bringing some additional talent into the Blackhawks organization. And I don't know what has happened to the drafts over the last couple years in this playthrough, but you can see here at the 28th pick in the draft, there's basically just garbage available as far as the potential of these players. So it seems like maybe something's not working entirely as intended in terms of the talent of players, because 2.5-star players and only a handful of them with that potential being around at this point in the draft seems like a somewhat shallow draft to me, but it is what it is. And with our first round pick, we're going to go with Dmitry Milodazorov, Russian player, playing in the OHL right now. Scouting report reasonably positive. Doesn't take success for granted. Not in it for the money. Noted for his intelligence. Looking at his bio, he was projected to be the 30th pick in the draft, ranked 14th among North American skaters. So with the 28th pick in the draft, doesn't seem like the worst option. Seems like he could be a decent offensive player if he continues to develop. Some questions as far as his mental ratings, but again, it doesn't seem like it's particularly deep draft, so we are going to go ahead and pick Dmitry Milodazorov. In the second round, with our pick from the Bruins, we're going to go with goalie Benoit Lux. He was projected to be the 49th pick, and he's viewed as the number one goalie available from Europe in the draft. Don't know that he's ever going to develop into anything. As I said, it seems like a very weak draft, but we will go ahead and pick Benoit here in the second round with our first second round pick. Moving on until our next pick. We'll see what we decide. And there's not a lot of talent here, even with our second round pick. So this is probably the last one we'll talk through. I think we're going to go with Roderick Rota, who had a pretty productive year for Chicoutimi, 38 goals and 35 assists. Pretty productive offensively. Very sportsman-like player. Thrives in the spotlight, isn't in it for the money. So a decent scouting report, decent durability. Definitely a borderline prospect, but there's just not a lot of options out there. So we are going to go with Roderick Rota with our second rounder. So we are done with the draft, and now things get interesting because we did get Isaac Rosen signed, and we did also get Simon Nemec signed. So we are going to be materially over the salary cap. With Nemec on board, we'll send Filion down to the AHL. And with Rosen on board, 86.4 million. So I think if we do get rid of Nazar and Luchanko, we probably just get under the cap. Let's see what things look like if we send Nazar down to the AHL. 85.27 with 23 players. So we probably need to get rid of even a bigger salary than either of those guys to make this work. So this is where the salary cap gymnastics and us getting creative with who we want to get rid of are going to definitely be a factor. Do we move on from a Dylan Larkin or a Nathan Villeneuve at center? That would be a bold move. But that's probably more the type of player we need to move on from to open up enough capacity. Oh, because the other issue is we don't have Eklund on the roster now. That could be a... that may have been a... very poor decision by me to not be factoring in Victor Eklund and his contract into this. Yeah, we're going to have to get rid of somebody who's somewhat more talented than we would like to. But given that that gives us 7 good defensemen with the addition of Nemec, and I think a potentially really dynamic offensive player with the addition of Isaac Rosen, I think it's fine. We're just going to have to get definitely more creative in who we move on from. Because, yeah, we are way over the salary cap at this point. that was my stupidity to not have Eklund on the roster when I was doing this math, even though he's only making $3.35 million, which isn't excessive for a player in his talent. Not having factored that in was a poor decision by me, and careless. And I think the first thing that we're going to need to do is we try to figure out this salary situation. Looking at our cap obligations for this year, right now we've still got big numbers on for Luchanko and Nazar, even though they're unlikely to make the roster with the additions that we've made. So I think we want to trade both of them away and then figure out the one other player that we're going to need to trade that's going to be a little bit more painful. In Nazar, still no offers, although obviously we've got the offer that we had received a few days ago. The Flyers would give us a 26-year-old right winger, Donovan Arsenault. Not all that exciting. Senators would give us a 25-year-old defenseman, Blake Ekron Bratton. Again, not all that exciting, but he's at least making the minimum. Wonder what both of those guys are making the minimum. I wonder what if we just package Nazar and Luchanko into a package and just see what we can get as far as a draft pick from somebody. Maybe that's the way to approach this. And it looks like for Nazar we can get a second and a fifth from Montreal. Scout thinks they'll probably accept that, so we're going to go ahead and offer that trade. And then we're also going to work on getting an offer out there for Jet Luchanko that be more just draft picks than players that we don't really want. And we've also pieced together a deal with the Canucks, who are in win now mode for Luchanko. They'll give us a first and a fourth. We have to wait till 2033 to get them, but I think that's fine. That's a really good return for us for a guy who is a versatile winger, but I just don't think should be on our roster given the other moves that we've made. So we're going to go ahead and offer that trade to them, and we'll see what happens over the next couple of days as we try to start clearing out a little bit of salary space, hopefully with those two moves. All right, we've got one step completed. The offer for Nazar for a second and a fifth has been accepted by the Canadiens. So right now we're at $87.5 million in terms of salary obligations. Go ahead and complete that trade. And all right, that takes, a little over $1 million off. So we'll get a little over another $1 million off. We'll be around 85 and change when we get that other trade completed, if we do. So we're probably going to have to be looking at someone in the high threes and then replace them with a minimum level player to kind of get there, which could put the veterans Cotter or Larkin on the bubble. Villeneuve maybe, but I don't know if it'll be quite enough money to get him off the books. Obviously, we're going to lose a player who's a good player, but bringing back Sillinger, one of our best two-way players, I think absolutely made sense. We needed a seventh defenseman, and certainly Nemec is better than a seventh defenseman. He's going to be starting almost every day for us, and we're really only paying at this point Hughes and Nemec any real money among our defensemen, so I don't have any concerns about that. And then Rosen, I think, is one of the more dynamic offensive players on our team. So I think we're probably going to be getting rid of a veteran who's experienced and someone who's certainly played with our team longer, but I still think that the moves ultimately make sense. But we'll see what we end up needing to let go of to make this all work out. I would think that Larkin's roster spot could be in jeopardy at his age. Not that he's making horrible money for what he is, less than $4 million for him. As I talked about when we signed him a year ago, I thought was a pretty good deal, but he is certainly declining at this point. So it's going to be an interesting decision. And the Canucks have accepted our offer too, so we'll go ahead and complete that trade. And like I thought, $85.1 million, so we got to get to 82.5, I believe. So we've got to take off about 2.6 million, but then we've also got to have enough money left to get a replacement player in there, which is going to be at a minimum $750,000. So Villeneuve may just get us there. But clearly it's Cotter, Larkin, and Villeneuve are the three guys who are making about the right amount of money for us to move on from them. And it's been a tough decision to figure out what we want to do here. But I don't think we can trade one of the centers. Center has traditionally been a extremely overpowered position for us where we've had a ton of talent. Right now, with the fact that we moved guys like Kent Johnson and Cole Sillinger from center to wing over the last couple of years, it's not as deep for us. Byfield is obviously our number one guy. Right now we've got Larkin and Villeneuve as our second and third centers, and then the youngster Thomas Vesely as our fourth center. I don't think we can afford to get rid of Larkin or Villeneuve, which means that Paul Cotter is the guy. Johnson and Sillinger are going to be our top two left wingers. Cotter probably would be the third liner, and then Eklund would be the fourth. But Eklund, quite honestly, is a pretty dynamic player, potentially. And he's also a lot younger. And a guy that we've got signed for 5 years, who probably is going to serve us better playing on a second or third line than on a fourth line. Means that our fourth line left winger could end up being someone like Linus Eriksson, who's had minimal NHL experience at this point. But I think that shopping Cotter is what we're going to need to do to get under the salary cap. And when, I think about it in terms of comparing Isaac Rosen to Paul Cotter, I think it's a obvious move that we have to make if this is what it comes down to. You look at the offensive ratings of Rosen, and there's absolutely no comparison. He's also almost 3.5 years younger. Defensively, Cotter definitely a little better, but physically Rosen totally on a different level. And even mentally, Rosen is a little better. He's just clearly a better player and a younger player. And in the case of Rosen, he is someone who can play both right and left wing for us, which is possible that he could end up sliding in as left winger for us at some point, given that with Shields, Bocage, Laferriere, and Dzeko feel like we've got, and Rosen feel like among those 5 right wingers, I don't have a problem if all 5 of those players are on our top 4 lines. And Rosen's certainly capable of playing left wing. Laferriere is, Bocage is. So we've got some options there. So I think it is time to shop Mr. Cotter. Modest level of interest. The players they're going to offer us aren't all that exciting, so I think we'll try to just get draft picks from somebody similar to what we did with Luchenko and Nazar. And it looks like we can potentially get a second and a third from the Devils for Cotter. I don't love moving on from him, but as I talked about, if it comes down to him or Rosen, Rosen is a much more dynamic offensive player. He's younger, not making all that much more money, and we've got him signed for a much longer term. And he also does have the ability, if we need to slide him over to left wing, where we're weakening ourselves a bit by moving on from Cotter. So I'm going to go ahead and offer this trade also. And if that goes through, then we should be right about where we need to be as far as the salary cap. And the Devils did accept that offer, so we're going to go ahead and complete that trade. And now we've got a little bit of money to spend. We've got about $1.4 million that we can use on the last winger on our team. So for the time being, we will just bring up Julian Mays, the youngster who was with us a little bit last year. Put him on the roster just as filler. So we know we've got 23 players and just under $82 million. So our heavy lifting for this offseason is definitely done at this point. But I do feel with the additions of Rosen and Nemec to be able to still be under the salary cap, we've made the team better than it was. Don't love moving on from Cotter, but as I talked about, I think if it's Cotter or Rosen, you got to go with Rosen. Don't love moving on from Luchenko, but he was going to be a marginal roster guy for us to begin with, and the fact that we got a pick back for a guy that we picked up on waivers not that long ago is positive. And then Nazar was very marginal to make the roster this coming year, and just a guy that I think may benefit from a change in scenery, given that he's never really developed to what we thought he could be here with the Blackhawks. So we've definitely lost some leadership, having to move on from Marner. That will, the fact that we're keeping Larkin now will likely allow us to make him the captain, perhaps. Although I guess there is an argument, since he's a second-line guy, maybe we just make Quentin Byfield the captain, since although Quentin Byfield's in the last year of his contract, so that doesn't make sense either. I think go with the veterans. We don't have to decide that right now, but clearly we'll have a new captain, likely Larkin or Hughes, and a new assistant captain when the new season does get underway. And as we kind of try to rebuild some of the younger organizational depth after moving on from Nazar and Luchenko, Jan Chauvin is a free agent. He is a player from Slovakia, and he's a player who was never drafted, never went through the NHL draft, so he's just a pure free agent. We've offered him an entry-level contract. Looks like a player who could certainly contribute for us, can play center or right wing. Don't know if he's quite ready for the NHL at this point, but certainly an interesting option. Really, his mental ratings are the only thing that concern me a bit, but for a flyer who we can bring in for a couple years on a two-way, I think he would be some nice organizational depth for us. And we're still waiting to hear back from Chauvin. In the meantime, Blackhawks remain one of the most popular teams in the NHL. New additions, Rosen and Nemec, two of the top selling jerseys in all of hockey, along with Hughes, Johnson, Wallstedt, Byfield, and Larkin. So the Blackhawks are printing money, even if we haven't been able to win more than one championship in this playthrough thus far. And we did get Jan Chauvin signed, so I think that's a little bit of organizational depth for us, which is good. Be surprised if he makes the roster coming out of training camp, but certainly a player that we'll probably end up stashing in the AHL, who could give us a little bit of depth when we experience some inevitable injuries as the season goes along. So glad to have the free agent from Europe on board. I don't think he speaks English yet, so that's all the more reason to maybe start him in the AHL. Hopefully he can pick up some things there. Yeah, he's fluent in Slovak, good in French, in Finnish and French. So he's probably going to have a bit of a difficult transition over to the U.S., but think that hopefully he's a talented enough player, and hopefully if we need some depth, he's a player who can provide it over the next couple of years as he gets more used to playing in North America. And we've now simmed ahead to the end of August. One other minor acquisition. We re-signed Carter Klippenstein, who's been with us for the AHL for the past few years, just as organizational depth. So nothing too exciting there. Would love to get another defenseman signed, but haven't been able to find the right situation for a younger defenseman who we can stash in the AHL. Just not a lot of opportunities on that front right now. We'll be heading into the preseason in just about 3 weeks, so we're getting close to finalizing things for this roster. Taking a quick look at job security, pretty solid, but certainly a win-now goal, as we've talked about. Ticket price change made people unhappy, but the bringing on Rosen and Nemec, and even actually Jan Chauvin, all helped in terms of fan happiness, so we're better than we were when the off-season started. And team harmony looking pretty decent right now as well. So things are going okay. I think we'll once again be one of the favorites when we get to the regular season. And the hope is that we can, as I said, maybe add an AHL level young defenseman who we don't need to get through waivers for a little bit more depth. I wouldn't mind doing that over the next 3 weeks, or even once the preseason gets started. And then hope that we remain healthy through the preseason and we're ready to drop the puck on the 2030-2031 season with a healthy roster that's ready to contend again in the NHL. And we have finally found a young defenseman. I can't imagine we're going to end up signing him. Julian Brown, the Kings own the rights to him, so he's a restricted free agent. We're offering him a 2-way contract at the NHL minimum with, we can submit the offer sheet. We don't need to offer any compensation. I'm pretty confident that they will match that offer for him. It's kind of interesting. Korchinski is still out there, one of the big free agents we let go. His demand has come down to $2.2 million. That's certainly a much more reasonable amount, but we don't have the opportunity to bring him back because we just don't have the cap space at this point. And actually, it looks like Mitch Marner must have signed with somebody. He had been a free agent for a pretty long time also, but it looks like he is now off the market, so we'll see what Mr. Marner got. The Islanders, just over $4 million a year, so he ended up being a lot more realistic. Certainly, we would have brought him back for $4 million, but when we brought Mr. Rosen on board at the same position, that ended any chance of us making a play for Marner later in the free agency period. And not surprisingly, the Kings matched our offer for Julian Brown, so still looking for some AHL level help at defenseman. Don't know whether we'll find it or not. I really like the 7 defensemen that we have. It's just a matter that if we do have some injuries, I don't love our depth across the organization right now of players who are ready to come in and contribute maybe once a week at the NHL level. We made a couple other offers. Alexander Pelevin is a restricted free agent, so I'm guessing that his current team will match the offer. Looks like it's Calgary. And then Carter Kowalik is a pure free agent, so I tend to think we'll be able to get him on board not the perfect option, but a guy, as I talked about, that we can at least stash in the AHL and have someone who we think can potentially play respectably at the NHL level on the roster. Not even quite sure with his level of skill whether he would be the first guy that we would call up. Since we do have guys like Filion and Minio and even Tate Dolinsky still in the system at AHL. None of them are great options if we have some injuries at defensemen, but again, I really like the 7 defensemen that we have right now, so even if we experience one injury, whoever we bring up is going to rarely be playing. And then if we have a couple of injuries, then we'd get in a situation where we're probably actually having to put someone on the ice that we would prefer not to, but we'll deal with that problem if and when it happens. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of prospective free agents for next offseason on our team, but although there's not a lot of them number-wise, 2 pretty important ones. Quinton Byfield, our first-line center and probably our best offensive player at this point, looking for about $9.5 million a year for 6 years. And then our starting goalie, Jesper Wallstedt, looking for a raise to about $8.5 million a year for 4 years. So those are both going to be tough decisions for us. Julian Mays, who probably won't even make the final roster, also a potential free agent. I think he's probably a restricted free agent. Yeah, so we'll auto-qualify him. He's only looking for $1.4 million. Can't imagine that number is going to change all that materially over the course of the year. And then Luke Coughlin, the young defenseman, he's looking for over $5 million a year. So that's going to be an interesting one for us. So I don't think there's anyone that we need to sign immediately before the season's even started, but clearly have potential for the level of talent on our team to drop off considerably next year if we were to lose all 4 of those players, and most notably Byfield, our starting center, our first-line center, Wallstedt, our starting goalie, and Coughlin, who's an important defenseman for us. And not surprisingly, the Flames did match our offer for Pelavine, but we did get Kowalik signed. So at least we've got another defenseman in our system. Again, I don't think he's going to be a necessarily impactful player for us, but gives us a little more depth for when those inevitable injuries happen over the course of the season. So with a salary of about $82 million and the preseason starting in just a week, I think the moves are kind of done for the Blackhawks at this point, and this is the team that we're at least going to start off the season with. And as we get ready to begin the preseason, time to pick out our captains, which we've been talking about. And we're going to promote Larkin to be our captain. I think that that's the right move. Quinn Hughes, we're going to move up to the first assistant. And then might be a bit of a controversial move here, but since Quinton Byfield is in the last year of his contract, he certainly would be a more than acceptable captain given his ratings. But we've got Kent Johnson, who's younger, signed for the next 5 years, and he also has pretty good personality traits to be a captain. So since we know that Johnson is going to be around with the organization longer, in all likelihood, we are going to appoint him as our second assistant captain for the upcoming season. So we've got 33 players in camp as the preseason begins. Take a look at the schedule. We've got a pretty intense schedule with looks like 7 games over the next 10 days. So going to be a pretty intensive schedule for the Blackhawks as we get ready for the season. And that's going to be it. It's going to be all in September, and then the regular season is going to begin on October 10th. So the goal is to get to know the players a little better. I don't think we have any huge roster battles going on, but you never know what the 23-man roster is going to look like when we come out of camp. hopefully it won't be driven by injuries, and it'll just be driven by what our decisions are as far as the best 23 players for the team who we can fit in under the salary cap. And we're getting near the end of the preseason training camp. Pretty good development broadly for our team among guys on the NHL roster: Chung, Coughlin, Eklund, Eriksson, Filion, Forget, Jekko, Klippenstein, Kowalik, Mays, Minio, Nemec, Rotundi, Servista, Shields, Svetibak, Veyu, Villeneuve, all getting better. Not all of them will end up making the roster, and you can see a lot of other players, much younger players that we have rights to, improving dramatically over the course of the offseason. Also, not a shock that Larkin at age 34 still kind of moving in the wrong direction, but he is our captain. And Svetibak regressing a little bit in terms of his professionalism. Season ticket numbers 18,443. Luxury box sales 162. Season ticket numbers, once again, we are number one despite the increase in our ticket prices this past off season. Unfortunately, an off-ice incident involving winger Alex Bocage. Fans aren't happy about it. Doesn't seem like the teammates are too interested. Seems like a pretty minor situation, just 1 point to fan happiness, and team harmony doesn't seem like there's any issues. So all things being concerned, seems like no harm, no foul. Speaking of no harm, no foul, got our final game of the preseason here at New York today. Nobody's banged up right now, so the goal is to just get through this final game without any material injuries. And of course, we did have a couple players banged up in that final game of the preseason. Matthias Lafreniere, day-to-day with a sore thumb. More significantly, Quentin Byfield, also day-to-day with an elbow contusion, but could impact him for 11 days. So it's going to be nip and tuck as to whether he'll be ready for the first game of the regular season. Overall, it was a really good preseason for the Blackhawks. We went 6-1. Only lost was on the road at Colorado. So we do have now just about enough time for Byfield to hopefully get healthy before the season gets underway back at Colorado, interestingly. And we are going to work on now getting the roster down to 23 players and then seeing if there's anything interesting on the waiver wire. Tend to think there probably won't be, given that we're so close to the cap and that we do like our team, but obviously we'll look at the opportunities that are available. And we're getting to the point where we're about to make our final cut. Obviously, Wallstedt and Svetibak and goalie. No surprises among the defensemen: Hughes, Veyu, Coughlin, Rotundi, Rinzel, Chung, and the new addition, Nemec. One decision left, the youngster Julian Mays, who can play left wing and center. And then Jan Chauvin, who we signed in the offseason, who can play center and right wing. Given that I think Chauvin is a better potential player, but given that Chauvin right now doesn't even speak any English, I think we are going to start him in the minors just to get him a little more accustomed to playing in North America, and we're actually going to send him all the way down to the ECHL, which he probably won't be happy with, but we typically only play players there for a little while and then move them up to the AHL if they prove competent on the ice, which I'm guessing he will. I think he is definitely a player that could contribute at the NHL level to us, particularly if we have any injuries on our center position, which is certainly possible. And Vesely, as our fourth-line center, certainly is not firm in being able to hold on to that position, I don't think. And certainly there's an argument that Villeneuve fighting for his spot on the team also, potentially. So I think Chauvin will be back at some point, hopefully when he's a little better at speaking English. So that means our wingers, Johnson Eklund, Sillinger, and then either Erickson or Mays likely as our fourth line left winger. The centers will be Byfield, Larkin, Villeneuve, and Vesely. And then the right wingers are going to be Shields, the new addition Rosen, Bocage, Laferriere, and then Adam Jecko, who can play right wing and center and was up with us pretty much all of last season. He's going to be fighting for a fourth line spot as a right winger and also battling, I think, with Vesely to be the fourth line center for us. So he should get some decent playing time. And hopefully we'll find some playing time for the youngster Mays as well. He's in the final year of his contract with us, so it's about time to kind of figure out what we have or we don't have with him. And as the new season gets ready to start, we are once again one of the Stanley Cup favorites, led by our center Quinton Byfield, who hopefully will be ready for day one. So we're once again viewed as one of the squads to beat. Hopefully after 2 straight President's Trophies, we can get a 3rd straight President's Trophy this season. And unlike the 2 previous years when we lost in the second round and the first round, hopefully we'll be well positioned to make a long run in the playoffs. And we'll find out our first steps along that process in our next episode when the new hockey season begins, and we'll see whether the Blackhawks can finally earn the second championship of this playthrough. Until we begin that episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.